My daughter screamed at me like I was a stranger. "Pay the rent or get out." I froze, unable to believe the audacity of the girl I raised. But a week later, I made a move so shocking, so unexpected, that it left her speechless, stunned the neighbors, and changed everything in the house forever. Sometimes the harshest lessons come from the people you love most. Before I continue, if this story shocked you, hit like and subscribe for more unbelievable family twists. Don't miss the next story, it will leave you speechless. The house had always been more than just bricks and walls. It was a repository of memories. Every corner echoed with laughter, tiny footsteps, and the aroma of meals lovingly prepared over decades. I had raised my daughter here, guiding her through childhood, school projects, heartbreaks, and milestones. I had celebrated every achievement, comforted every tear, and silently carried her burdens along with my own. And yet, that morning, everything changed. Her voice sliced through the quiet, sharp and commanding, "Pay the rent or get out." I froze, staring at the young woman who had once clung to me for comfort and protection. The audacity of her words shocked me. My daughter, the girl I had nurtured, who trusted me implicitly, was now standing before me like a stranger, demanding money as if she owned the house and the life within it. I tried to find words, but they tangled in my throat. I thought this was our home," I murmured, disbelief thick in my voice. She did not soften. Instead, her glare intensified. "I said pay the rent." "I'm serious, Dad." Her hands rested firmly on her hips, and the authority in her tone left no room for negotiation. It wasn't simply about money, it was about control, respect, and power. My heart ached at the transformation I saw before me. The little girl who had once needed me now challenged me, treating me as though I was subordinate. And yet a strange fire ignited inside me. Hurt and disbelief mingled with pride for the strength she had developed, and hurt for the coldness she now displayed. I walked through the familiar hallways, touching the walls where her handprints from years ago still lingered faintly. Every photograph, every keepsake, reminded me of the bond we had once shared, and I realized this confrontation was only the beginning. The week ahead would test patience, strategy, and the very dynamics of our relationship. I would need to teach her, through timing, wit, and a subtle plan, that respect isn't demanded. It's earned. The house had changed, and so had she. But the lesson I planned would change everything. By the next morning, the house felt colder than ever. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the floor, but it did nothing to warm the tension in the air. My daughter sat at the dining table, phone in hand, eyes flicking toward me every few seconds, silently daring me to speak first. The breakfast I had prepared sat untouched, the toast growing cold, the coffee steaming but ignored. Every small sound, the ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, felt amplified like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "I don't understand why you're acting this way," I began carefully. "This is our home. We've shared it for years. Why are you demanding rent now?" Her eyes didn't soften. Instead, they sharpened, calculating and unyielding. "Dad, I've worked hard. I take care of this house. I pay the bills. I manage everything while you... What have you done lately? It's time you contributed. Or maybe it's time you realized I'm not a child anymore." Her words pierced me like a blade. The little girl who had once clung to me, who had trusted me implicitly, had become a young woman whose strength and independence now felt like a weapon. I felt a mix of hurt, disbelief, and an odd spark of determination. She may have thought she had the upper hand, but patience, strategy, and timing were still my allies. I walked slowly through the house, observing the subtle changes she had made to assert control. The bills neatly stacked, the cupboards locked, the furniture shifted just slightly. Everything spoke of her authority, her belief that she had claimed the house as her own. And yet in each detail I saw an opportunity. A small misstep here, a misplaced expectation there. These would become the pieces I could use to turn the situation in a way she never imagined. As the day wore on, the tension thickened. She tested boundaries with every glance, every gesture, every carefully measured word. But I remained calm, planning quietly, observing, preparing. By the end of the week, she would see that authority and respect cannot be demanded. They are earned, often in ways far more subtle and shocking than she could possibly anticipate. By midweek, The house had become a battlefield of unspoken words and silent tension. Every room seemed charged with energy, as if waiting for the inevitable confrontation. My daughter moved through the house with precision, her footsteps sharp, her eyes constantly assessing. She was no longer the playful, trusting child I had raised. She had transformed into a young woman asserting dominance, testing limits and demanding control. That evening, she stormed into the kitchen, slamming the cabinets with a force that rattled the dishes inside. "I'm serious, Dad," she shouted. "If you don't pay the rent by tomorrow, you're out. No excuses." Her voice was steady, confident, and utterly uncompromising. I watched her for a long moment, feeling both shock and a strange surge of pride. The stubbornness, determination, and strength she displayed were traits I had nurtured, yet seeing them directed against me cut deeply. I responded quietly, carefully measuring each word. "I understand your frustration, but respect isn't earned through shouting or threats. Family isn't measured by money or control. It's built through understanding, patience, and honesty." Her response was a bitter laugh, sharp and cold. "Patience? Honesty? Dad, I've been patient for years while you've drifted through life without accountability. I cook, I clean, I pay the bills, and you? What have you done? You think words will change anything now? It's time for action, not lectures." Her defiance hit me like a wave, but instead of breaking me, it ignited a plan forming in the depths of my mind. This confrontation wasn't about the rent alone. It was about teaching her a lesson in respect, strategy, and consequence. I would not confront her with anger, but with subtle, carefully timed moves that would ultimately shift the balance in a way she never expected. As the night deepened, I moved through the hallway, past the photographs and mementos of her childhood. Memories flickered through my mind, her first steps, birthday parties, school plays, graduation ceremonies, and yet the warmth of nostalgia was tempered by the reality. The child I knew was gone, replaced by someone who needed to understand that life's lessons often arrive in the most unexpected, unforgettable ways. By the time I sat down in the living room, the plan was forming with clarity. She believed she had the upper hand. She believed control rested solely in her hands. But patience, timing, and subtle strategy are powerful allies. And soon, she would realize that the lessons I intended to teach were far more impactful than she ever imagined. The night before the deadline, the house felt heavier than ever. Every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, even the wind against the windows seemed amplified, echoing the tension that had built over the week. My daughter sat in her room, meticulously reviewing her plans, confident that she had won before the confrontation even began. She believed the house, the money, and even me were hers to command. I moved quietly through the living room, observing the subtle ways she had asserted control. The cupboards were locked, the bills neatly stacked, and the furniture arranged in a manner that gave her a sense of dominance. Everything was designed to assert authority, but in each detail I saw openings, opportunities for subtle influence, and carefully timed lessons. I made myself a cup of coffee and walked to the window, staring at the quiet street outside. My mind replayed the week's events, the shouting, the cold glares, the moments where she tested my patience. Each incident had prepared me for this final stage. She had no idea that her perceived victory was temporary, that the tide was about to turn. As I glanced at the photographs lining the hallway, memories of her childhood, her milestones, and our shared moments flashed before my eyes. Every laugh, every tear, every achievement reminded me of the bond we had built. And yet, the tension between us had grown so thick that it threatened to overshadow the love that remained. I knew that the lesson I planned would not only teach her respect, but also remind her of the deeper connections that bind family together, lessons that money and authority alone could never convey. Whispered to myself, tomorrow she will see that patience, strategy, and timing are far more powerful than shouting or threats. And by the end of this week, she will understand that respect is earned, not demanded. The stage was set. The countdown had begun. The house, once a place of comfort and warmth, had become the arena for a lesson she would never forget. And I was ready. The morning of the so-called deadline arrived with a strange stillness. My daughter emerged from her room dressed sharply, her phone clutched in her hand as though it were a weapon. She didn't look at me right away, but the faint smirk on her lips told me she was convinced of her victory. She thought today was the day she proved her dominance, the day she forced me into submission. She sat at the dining table, tapping her fingers against the wood. "Well, Dad," she said at last, her tone heavy with arrogance, "it's the end of the week. Do you have the money, or are you finally packing?" Her words were like daggers, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I sipped my coffee slowly, deliberately, and let silence fill the room. I could see her impatience growing with every passing second. She expected me to crumble, to beg, or perhaps to argue. But I had no intention of giving her the satisfaction. Finally, I spoke, my voice calm but deliberate. "You seem so sure of yourself. You've spent all week preparing for this moment, haven't you?" Her smirk widened. "Of course. I'm not playing games, Dad. If you can't pay, you're out. Simple as that." I set down my cup, meeting her eyes directly. Sometimes the simplest things are the most complicated, and sometimes control is an illusion. For the first time, her expression flickered. Just a fraction of hesitation, but it was enough for me to know my words had struck somewhere deep. She quickly masked it with bravado. "Big words won't change reality. You need to contribute or you leave. It's that simple." I rose from the table, walking slowly through the hallway, letting my hand brush against the photographs of her childhood. "Reality," I said softly, almost to myself, "has a way of surprising us when we least expect it." She didn't follow me, but I could feel her eyes on my back, burning with frustration. She thought I was bluffing, that I was too passive, too weak to challenge her. But I was planting seeds, small doubts, subtle cracks in her certainty. That day I began making quiet moves. I made phone calls she didn't hear, checked papers she had overlooked, and reviewed documents she assumed were irrelevant. She thought she had all the control, but the truth was, she had left doors open, blind spots she never considered. And I was ready to use every single one. By nightfall, she confronted me again, her voice sharper, more desperate. "This isn't a joke, Dad. Tomorrow, if I don't see rent, you're gone." I met her anger with a calm smile. "We'll see, my dear. Sometimes the lesson comes when you least expect it." She stormed off, slamming her door. I sat quietly in the living room, the echoes of her rage bouncing off the walls. She thought she had cornered me. But in truth, the game had only just begun. The next morning, sunlight streamed into the house, but it didn't feel warm anymore. The walls seemed to carry the tension, every corner echoing with the silence that hung between us. My daughter barely looked at me as she bustled about, her voice sharp as she made phone calls to friends and her husband, bragging that soon she'd have the upper hand in her own home. I watched her quietly from the armchair, pretending to be lost in the newspaper. What she didn't realize was that I wasn't idle at all. Every moment of stillness was a calculation. Every nod, every silence was part of a bigger plan. She had declared war on her own father, and though it broke my heart, I had no choice but to fight back, not with fists or shouting, but with patience, foresight, and something she sorely lacked: wisdom. That afternoon, I stepped outside into the crisp air and walked toward the old shed. Inside, stacked neatly in boxes she hadn't touched in years, were documents that carried power she didn't even know existed. Property papers, tax records, bank accounts, things she had dismissed, assuming I was nothing but a weak old man clinging to memories. I opened a box, the scent of old paper filling my lungs, and pulled out the deed to the very house we stood in. My name was still on it. My blood had paid for every brick, every nail, every corner. She thought her threats meant something, but the truth was she was playing on a board I had built. And soon I would remind her of that fact in a way she could never forget. Later that evening, she tried again, her tone mocking as she leaned against the doorframe. "You're awfully calm, Dad, maybe too calm. You do realize tomorrow is your last chance, right?" I looked up at her with steady eyes. "Do you remember when you were a child, and you used to hide behind me whenever life scared you? You used to say, 'Dad will fix it.'" She shifted uncomfortably but forced a laugh. "That was a long time ago. Things have changed." "Yes," I said, folding the paper in my hand with deliberate care. "Things have changed. But some truths remain the same. You'll realize that soon." She rolled her eyes and stormed off, muttering under her breath about how stubborn I was. But what she didn't see was the faint smile on my lips. Every harsh word she threw at me only fueled my resolve. That night, when the house was dark and she was fast asleep, I sat at the dining table under the dim glow of the lamp. The deed lay in front of me, its weight heavier than any burden I had carried in years. Tomorrow she planned to evict me. Tomorrow she thought she'd prove I was nothing. But tomorrow I would turn her world upside down. The following morning arrived heavy with anticipation. I could hear her footsteps pacing in the hallway long before she appeared. She was restless, almost giddy, like a predator certain of its kill. But what she didn't know was that she had already stepped into her own trap. She entered the living room with a smug expression, her arms folded across her chest. "Well, Dad," she said coldly, "it's decision day. Do you have the money? Or do I call someone to help you pack?" Her voice cut through the air like a blade, but I didn't rise to meet it. Instead, I sat calmly in my chair, an envelope resting on the table beside me. She noticed it immediately, her brow furrowing. "What's that?" she demanded, suspicion creeping into her tone. "Patience," I replied softly, my fingers brushing against the edge of the envelope. All in good time, her irritation spiked. "Don't play games with me, Dad. You've been freeloading here for months. It's not fair to me and my husband. We are trying to build our lives and you're living in the house I bought," I interrupted, my voice firm but quiet. Her jaw tightened. For a split second she faltered, the truth pricking her pride. But arrogance quickly replaced hesitation. "That doesn't matter anymore. You don't pay rent, you don't stay. It's simple." "Simple," I echoed, standing slowly, letting the moment stretch. "Life isn't as simple as you think." I walked over to the wall where family portraits still hung, pictures of her as a little girl, holding my hand, smiling wide, her innocence untarnished. I touched the frame gently. "Do you remember this day? You fell off your bike, scraped your knee, and cried until I carried you home. You said I was your hero." Her face hardened, but I caught the flicker of guilt in her eyes. She turned away quickly. "That was a long time ago," she muttered. "Stop living in the past." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "The past builds the present, and the present decides the future. You think you're in control, but you've forgotten who laid the foundation beneath your feet." She spun on me, her anger blazing. "Enough, this is my house now. My rules. Either you pay me rent or tomorrow morning you're gone." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I picked up the envelope and held it between us. She glared at it like it was a threat, her impatience boiling over. "What's in there?" she snapped. "Everything you've chosen to ignore," I said quietly. "And tomorrow, when I open it, you'll finally see the truth." Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it by crossing her arms again. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. Not fear of me, but of losing the control she thought she held so tightly. She stormed off without another word, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. I stayed behind, the envelope still in my hand, feeling the weight of both paper and destiny. Tomorrow would not just be a confrontation. It would be the reckoning. That night, sleep refused to come. I sat in the quiet darkness, staring at the shadows dancing across the ceiling, my mind heavy with the weight of what tomorrow would bring. Every tick of the clock echoed like thunder in my ears, counting down the hours to the inevitable collision between father and daughter. From down the hallway, I could hear her muffled laughter as she spoke on the phone. Her voice carried a cruel confidence, as though she had already won. "Yes, by tomorrow he'll be gone," she said to someone. I assumed her husband. "Finally, I'll have the house the way it should be. No more old man taking up space." The words cut deeper than any blade could, but I held on to my composure. If she wanted to believe I was a burden, so be it. Tomorrow her illusions would shatter. At dawn, I brewed my coffee as usual, the aroma filling the air, calm and steady. She entered the kitchen dressed sharply again, her lips curved into that familiar smirk. Today was the day she thought she would cement her victory. "Good morning, Dad," she said mockingly, almost singing the words. "I hope you're ready. Today's your last chance." I slid the envelope across the table, its edges crisp, its contents dangerous. "Everything I need to say," I told her, "is inside this, but you'll hear it when the time is right." She snatched it up, tempted to tear it open, but I placed my hand firmly on top of hers. "Not yet," I warned. "You'll see soon enough." Frustration surged in her eyes. She was desperate to know what I was hiding, and that desperation was already beginning to crack the armor of her confidence. The rest of the day unfolded like a storm building on the horizon. Every moment was laced with tension. She moved through the house like a warden patrolling her territory, glancing at me as though waiting for me to admit defeat. But I remained calm, reading my paper, sipping my coffee, watching her unravel bit by bit. That evening, just before sunset, she made her grand declaration. She stood in the living room, her husband by her side now, both of them glaring at me like I was a trespasser in my own home. "This is it, Dad," she announced, her voice sharp and unforgiving. "You either pay the rent tonight, or by tomorrow morning you're out of here. No excuses, no delays." Her husband crossed his arms and nodded in agreement, adding fuel to the fire. "She's right. We can't keep carrying you. This isn't fair to us." I looked at the two of them, my daughter, the little girl I had once carried in my arms, and the man who now whispered poison into her ear. My heart ached, but my resolve stood firm. I leaned back in my chair, meeting their eyes with calm certainty. "Tomorrow morning," I said softly, almost kindly, "everything will change. You think you hold the power, but you don't understand whose house this truly is. Tomorrow you'll find out." The words landed like thunder. My daughter's smirk faltered for the briefest second, replaced by unease she couldn't mask. Her husband tried to laugh it off, but even he couldn't hide the flicker of doubt. As they stormed away, slamming doors behind them, I sat alone in the fading light, the envelope resting on the table beside me. Tomorrow the truth would rise like the sun, and when it did, the entire balance of power would shift forever, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled. The morning of reckoning arrived cloaked in silence. The house felt heavy, as though it knew what was about to unfold. I woke before dawn, the first rays of light stretching across the floorboards like long-reaching fingers. My daughter and her husband were still asleep, unaware that their world was only hours away from being turned upside down. I sat at the dining table, the envelope in front of me, my hands folded calmly over it. It wasn't just paper, it was truth, power, and the weight of decades of sacrifice. I thought of all the nights I had worked double shifts, the sweat and blood that had built these walls, the laughter and tears that had filled these rooms. This house was more than shelter. It was the soul of my family. And today I would remind them of that. By mid-morning, the household stirred to life. My daughter entered the kitchen first, her eyes still swollen from sleep but carrying that same cold sharpness. She looked at the envelope on the table and smirked. "Still clinging to that? It won't save you. Today's the day you're out." Her husband followed, adjusting his tie with an air of triumph. He looked me up and down with thinly veiled disdain. "It's about time," he said. "You've had a free ride long enough." I remained calm, sipping my coffee as if this were just another morning. "You seem so confident," I said softly. "But confidence built on ignorance is fragile." My daughter slammed her hand on the table. "Enough riddles, Dad. Either you pay the rent now or you're gone. We've been more than patient." Slowly, deliberately, I slid the envelope across the table toward her. Her eyes narrowed as she snatched it up, tearing it open with shaking hands. Papers spilled out, deeds, tax records, official documents. She glanced at them quickly, then frowned. "What is this?" Her husband leaned in, his smugness faltering as his eyes scanned the documents. The color drained from his face. These are ownership papers," he stammered. "That's right," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "This house, every brick, every nail, it belongs to me. It always has. I paid for it, I maintained it, and I never signed it over to anyone. You've been threatening to throw me out of my own home." The silence that followed was deafening. My daughter's lips parted, but no words came out. Her husband stepped back, his bravado collapsing like a house of cards. The certainty they had clung to was gone in an instant, replaced by shock and disbelief. You can't be serious," my daughter whispered. "Oh, I'm very serious," I replied. "You wanted me out?" "No, it is you who will be leaving. Today you learn the difference between illusion and reality." Her face paled, her arrogance crumbling under the weight of the truth. For the first time in weeks I saw not a tyrant, but the scared little girl who once clung to my hand. But it was too late. The game had changed and I held all the cards. The room seemed to shrink after my words, the walls closing in on them as the truth settled like a storm cloud overhead. My daughter's hand trembled as she held the deed, her once confident voice cracking under the pressure. "No, this can't be." "You never said anything." "You never—" "I didn't need to," I interrupted, my tone calm but firm. "You were too busy believing I was powerless. You saw an old man sitting quietly in his chair, and you thought silence meant weakness. But silence, my dear, often hides strength." Her husband snatched the papers from her hand, scanning each one desperately, as though some detail might prove me wrong. But the more he read, the more his face crumpled. He slammed the documents on the table in frustration. "This doesn't change anything. We live here now. We've been paying the bills, keeping this place running. I rose slowly from my chair, my presence filling the room. Bills? You think electricity and water compare to the years I spent building this home? The nights I skipped meals so you could eat? The decades of sacrifice that gave you this roof over your head? You dare to stand here and talk about fairness? His mouth opened, but no sound came out. My daughter's eyes darted between us, panic slowly overtaking her arrogance. She had prepared for me to plead, to crumble, to beg for mercy. But she hadn't prepared for this, for her foundation to crack in one swift blow. I leaned closer, my voice quiet but sharp as steel. You tried to evict me from my own home. Do you know what that means? It means you've forgotten who I am, and worse, you've forgotten who you are. Tears welled in her eyes, but pride kept them from falling. Dad, I didn't mean— Yes, you did, I cut in, the weight of my words striking her like thunder. You meant every cruel word. You meant every threat. But intent doesn't erase reality. And the reality is this. You live here at my mercy, not the other way around. Her husband tried to intervene again, raising his voice. You can't just throw us out. The law— I slammed my hand down on the table, the sound echoing through the house. The law is on my side, I thundered. This is my property, my name on the deed. You have no claim, no power, no right to dictate terms to me. The force of my voice silenced them both. For the first time they looked small, cornered, their grand facade of control crumbling into dust. My daughter's lips quivered. So what now? Are you going to kick us out? I stared at her, my heart torn between fury and sorrow. She was my child, the little girl I once read bedtime stories to, the one who used to sit on my shoulders and laugh without a care in the world. But she was also the woman who had humiliated me, who had tried to strip me of my dignity. The weight of that contradiction pressed heavily on me. I didn't answer her right away. Instead, I turned, walking slowly toward the window, the morning light casting long shadows across the floor. Behind me, the silence was thick, broken only by their shallow breaths. Finally, I spoke, my back still turned. What happens now depends on you. Whether you remain here as family or leave as strangers, that choice is yours. The words hung in the air like a sentence awaiting judgment. The silence stretched so long it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. My daughter stood frozen, her face pale, the papers clutched tightly in her trembling hands. Her husband paced furiously, his footsteps slamming against the wooden floor, his pride unwilling to accept defeat. This isn't over, he snapped, glaring at me as though sheer anger could rewrite reality. We've invested our time, our money. This house is ours just as much as it is yours. I turned slowly, meeting his eyes with a gaze that had weathered storms far greater than his temper. Yours? I said quietly, yet my voice carried like a hammer. Tell me, what brick did you lay here? What night did you go hungry so these walls could stand? What sacrifice did you make so that a little girl could grow up in safety? This house was built with my blood, my sweat, my tears. You have contributed nothing but entitlement. His jaw tightened, but he had no answer. He turned toward my daughter, seeking backup, but her eyes were downcast. The fight in her seemed to drain away as reality pressed in. She whispered faintly, Dad, I thought it would be easier this way. You'd pay your share and share. I cut in sharply, my voice cracking like thunder. Do you truly believe money could repay what I've given you? Every moment I held you when you cried, every sacrifice I made so you'd never know hunger or fear, was that not a payment? And yet here you stand, treating me like a burden, like some tenant you can discard at will. Her tears finally fell, streaking down her cheeks. But I didn't let up. The wound she had carved into my heart demanded to be acknowledged. You screamed at me to pay rent or get out, I continued, my voice trembling with both pain and fury. But now you see the truth. It is not I who must leave, but you who have forgotten where you come from. Her husband tried once more, desperation seeping into his tone. You're twisting this. We only wanted fairness. We only wanted respect. I stepped closer, my shadow looming over him. Respect, I hissed. Respect is earned. Respect is built. And what you both gave me was not respect, but humiliation. You thought you could strip me of my dignity in my own home. That ends today. The words struck like lightning. My daughter broke down sobbing openly, her pride shattered. She dropped the papers onto the table and covered her face with her hands. Her husband stood rigid, fists clenched, but I could see the cracks forming in his defiance. He knew the battle was lost, though his pride would not let him admit it. I picked up the papers, holding them high like a verdict. This house is mine. This truth is final. From this moment forward, you will never again speak to me as though I am less than you. If you choose to stay here, you stay under my roof, under my terms. If not, the door is wide open and you may leave. The declaration echoed through the house, a final hammer of justice. My daughter's sobs filled the silence, her husband staring at the floor in defeat. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight lift from my chest, not just the burden of their cruelty, but the heavy silence I had endured. I had spoken. And they had no answer. The air was heavy, so thick with silence that even the ticking clock on the wall seemed hesitant to intrude. My daughter sat hunched over, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. The strong, confident woman who had screamed at me just days earlier was gone. What remained was the broken image of a little girl caught between pride and regret. Her husband, however, still clung to the scraps of his arrogance. He stepped forward, pointing a trembling finger at me. This doesn't give you the right to lord over us. So what if your name is on the deed? You're old, and sooner or later, this place will be ours anyway. You can't hold on to it forever. His words were venomous, but they didn't pierce me. Instead, I laughed softly, low and bitter, the kind of laugh that comes from a lifetime of seeing people's true colors. Ah, there it is. The truth finally slips out. You never wanted fairness. You never wanted respect. All you ever wanted was this house. You thought if you pushed me far enough, I'd crumble and hand it to you. But you miscalculated, he faltered, his eyes widening as the weight of his greed was exposed in front of my daughter. She turned toward him slowly, her tear-streaked face hardening with betrayal. Is that true? She whispered. All this time. It wasn't about us, was it? It was about the house? He stammered, searching for words, but the silence that followed was damning. She covered her mouth in shock, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I stepped forward, placing the deed firmly back on the table with a heavy thud. This home will not become your bargaining chip. It is the heart of this family. And as long as I breathe, it will remain under my protection. If you cannot respect that, then you have no place here. My daughter looked at me then, really looked at me. Her pride, her anger, all of it seemed to crumble as she saw not just a father, but a man who had carried her entire life on his back. She fell to her knees, clutching my hand with desperation. Dad, I'm sorry. I don't know what came over me. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I let him twist everything. Please don't hate me. Her words tore at my heart. I wanted to forgive her instantly, to wipe away the pain in her eyes, but the wound she had inflicted still throbbed raw and deep. I pulled my hand away gently and said, Apologies don't erase actions. You tried to cast me out, humiliate me. You let someone poison you against your own blood. That will take time to heal. Her husband's face darkened, anger replacing his fear. You can't just push us out like this. Where would we even go? I met his fury with calm steel. That is not my concern. You made your choices. Now you live with them. You wanted me gone, but instead it is you who stand on the edge of exile. Think carefully about your next move. The weight of my words fell like an executioner's blade. He looked around the room. The family portraits on the wall, the furniture worn with memories, the very air heavy with history, and he realized none of it belonged to him. Not now, not ever. He opened his mouth to argue again, but stopped when my daughter turned to him, her eyes filled not with love, but with disgust. Get out, she whispered. Just get out. The climax of their arrogance had collapsed into ashes. I stood there, silent but unyielding, as the balance of power shifted fully into my hands. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't the one standing on trial. They were, and the verdict was final. The silence after my daughter's whisper, "Get out," was deafening. Her husband's face twisted with disbelief, as though he couldn't process that she had turned against him. He stuttered, his bravado slipping away like sand through clenched fists. You don't mean that. You can't just throw me away like trash. But her eyes, once clouded with pride and misplaced loyalty, were now clear. Clear with anger, with hurt, with the realization that the man she trusted had been nothing but a parasite. I mean it, she said firmly, her voice cracking but determined. You don't love me. You love what you thought you could take. And I won't let you destroy what little I have left. I stood quietly, letting her words carry their own weight. For so long I had felt powerless, beaten down by the betrayal of my own child, yet here she was, finally seeing the truth with her own eyes. It wasn't victory that I felt, it was something heavier, more sorrowful. A father should never have to witness his child learn such a painful lesson in this way. Her husband's mask broke. His shoulders slumped, his fists clenched at his sides, and for a moment I thought he might lash out. But then he looked at me, at the unyielding steadiness in my eyes, and he realized he had lost. Not just the house, not just his false control, but my daughter's trust forever. He turned on his heel, storming toward the door. Before leaving, he spat one last venomous remark. "You'll regret this. Both of you." The door slammed shut behind him, leaving an echo that seemed to linger like a ghost. The room felt colder without him, yet lighter at the same time. My daughter collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands once again. But this time it wasn't arrogance breaking her. It was grief, guilt, and shame. "Dad," she whispered through her tears, "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't even deserve to call this place home anymore." I walked over slowly, my steps heavy. I placed a hand on her shoulder, and for a moment she flinched as though expecting me to turn away. But I didn't. "This house is more than walls and bricks," I said quietly. "It's the heart of our family. And no matter how far you strayed, you are still part of it. But forgiveness takes time." Her sobs grew softer, her body trembling as she clung to my hand. In that moment, I knew the damage done could never fully be undone. But I also knew she was no longer blind. She had seen the monster she had married for what he truly was. And though it broke her, it might also be the very thing that saved her. For the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope. The hours after his departure were strangely quiet, almost unnervingly so. The storm had passed, yet the air felt thick with leftover tension, like the silence after a violent thunderclap. My daughter sat across from me, her eyes red and swollen, her body trembling with the weight of everything she had just lost. For years, she had believed she was building a future with him. She had sacrificed her peace, her dignity, even her bond with me, her father, all for the illusion of love. Now with the mask stripped away, she was left staring at the wreckage of her choices. "Dad," she murmured, her voice cracking, "how could I have been so blind? I thought he cared for me. But all he ever wanted was control. I let him turn me against you." She broke into sobs again, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably. I wanted to tell her it was all right, that we could simply move forward. But deep inside, I knew the scars would remain, for her and for me. Forgiveness was not something I could hand over so easily, not when my own heart was still bleeding from her betrayal. "You were blinded by what you wanted to see," I said quietly, folding my hands on the table. "Love can do that. It makes fools of even the wisest of us. But what matters now is what you do with the truth in front of you." She lifted her face, searching my eyes for a trace of mercy. For a moment I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who once clung to me when thunder scared her at night. That memory twisted the knife deeper, because the little girl I remembered had grown into a woman who could wound me without hesitation. "Do you hate me?" she whispered. The words barely carried across the room, but they cut sharper than anything her husband had ever said. I inhaled deeply, closing my eyes for a moment before answering. "No, I don't hate you, but I hate what you became when you let him guide your heart. I hate the words you threw at me like weapons, and I hate that it took losing everything for you to finally see the truth." Her lips trembled as she reached for my hand, but I didn't move. She needed to sit with the weight of her actions, to feel the depth of her mistake. Forgiveness couldn't come in a single night. It would take time, honesty, and proof that she was truly ready to change. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold. It felt symbolic somehow. The end of one chapter, the dying of a toxic bond, and perhaps the faint possibility of a new beginning. We sat in silence for a long time, father and daughter, separated by years of pain yet bound together by blood. And though the house still carried the echo of her husband's venom, I realized it also carried something stronger, the resilience of family. The next morning, the house felt quieter, but in a comforting way rather than tense. The storm of confrontation had passed, leaving an odd mix of relief and lingering sorrow. My daughter moved about slowly, her hands busy with chores she had once delegated to me, or worse, ignored entirely. She approached me with a tentative expression, holding a cup of coffee. I made this for you," she said softly, placing it on the table. Her eyes avoided mine at first, but then she lifted them, searching for a hint of acceptance. "I don't expect forgiveness yet, but I want to start making things right." I nodded slowly, acknowledging her effort. "Actions speak louder than words," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You've made mistakes, but recognizing them is the first step." She swallowed, the lump in her throat evident. "I don't want to lose this us because of him. I don't want to forget what family means." I reached out and placed my hand over hers. Family isn't about perfection. It's about returning again and again after you stumble. It's about being honest, even when honesty hurts. If you're ready to commit to that, we can begin to rebuild. Her eyes glistened with tears, this time not of guilt alone but of hope. She nodded, a small but meaningful gesture that spoke volumes. "I am ready," she whispered. Over the next few hours we moved through the house together, repairing small things, clearing up leftover tensions, and speaking in words we had withheld for too long. It wasn't easy. There were moments of hesitation, lingering bitterness, and memories that pricked like tiny needles, but slowly, the walls seemed to breathe again. Her husband's absence hung in the air like a shadow, but it was a shadow that reminded us both why this moment mattered. The house belonged to the family, to those who understood respect, loyalty, and love, not to someone who sought control through manipulation. By evening, a tentative peace settled over us. We sat together on the couch, quiet, yet connected in a way we hadn't been for years. The past couldn't be erased, but the present, this fragile, tentative present, offered a chance to begin anew. I realized then that the true lesson wasn't about ownership, confrontation, or revenge. It was about understanding, accountability, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths. And as my daughter leaned slightly closer, letting me hold her hand once again, I knew that maybe, just maybe, we could heal together. The following morning brought a soft, golden light into the house, warming the walls that had witnessed both conflict and reconciliation. My daughter moved quietly, her actions careful, almost reverent, as though treating the home and the bond between us with newfound respect. She approached me while I sipped my coffee, hesitating before speaking. "Dad, I just want you to know I understand now. What I did was wrong. I let pride and anger guide me instead of love and patience. I'm sorry." Her words were genuine, heartfelt, carrying the weight of remorse. I nodded slowly, letting the silence absorb them. Forgiveness wasn't immediate, but acknowledgement was the first step toward healing. "I know," I said softly. "It takes courage to admit mistakes. And it takes time to rebuild trust. But today we start." She smiled faintly, a fragile expression but one that held hope. We spent the day together, tidying the house, sharing small conversations, and revisiting old memories that reminded us why our bond mattered more than conflict ever could. Every laugh, every shared glance, was a small stitch sewing the torn fabric of our relationship back together. Outside, the wind carried a sense of renewal. The man who had tried to control her and manipulate us was gone, leaving only lessons and clarity in his wake. My daughter's eyes, now clear and reflective, reminded me that even in moments of betrayal, growth is possible when honesty and reflection take their place. By evening, the house felt lighter. My daughter and I shared a quiet moment on the porch, the sunset painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. We didn't need words, our silence spoke volumes. The tension had eased, the power imbalance resolved, and the understanding between us had deepened. I realized then that victory wasn't about asserting control or proving strength. It was about guiding, protecting, and patiently waiting for the moment when truth could be seen and acknowledged. And in that quiet golden hour, I understood that though wounds remain, love and respect can always carve a path toward healing. The house was ours, not just in legal terms, but in spirit. And as my daughter leaned slightly closer, letting the warmth of reconciliation fill the spaces once occupied by pride and deceit, I knew the family had endured stronger than before. Family can be complicated, and sometimes those closest to us can shock us in ways we never imagine. But even in betrayal and manipulation, strength and resilience can prevail. This story is a reminder that standing up for yourself while maintaining love and integrity is never easy, yet always necessary. Life is full of twists, and the people we trust the most can test our patience, loyalty, and courage. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping real-life family stories and revenge tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Turn on notifications so you never miss a shocking twist, a moment of justice, or an emotional revelation that will leave you questioning everything about trust, loyalty, and family. Share your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing your experiences and reactions. The next story promises even more suspense, emotion, and shocking truths. Stay tuned and be ready to witness family drama like never before.